Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 146 for the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you with the support of Jubilant Biosys.
With more than 20 years' experience in small molecule drug discovery, Jubilant Biosys offers comprehensive services in integrated drug discovery, contract research, development and manufacturing. We have recently reached a strategic agreement with Pierre Fabre Laboratories to acquire their biologics R&D centre at Saint-Julien-en-Genevois in France. This centre of excellence provides a strategic footprint for Jubilant in Europe and the platform for a unique delivery model that integrates domain expertise in monoclonal antibodies, ADCs and related conjugated modalities with the chemistry capability of 1,200 scientists in India. If you'd like to know more, please visit us at www.jubilantbiosys.com.
This week on the podcast, I sit down with Flagship Pioneering's Lovisa Afzelius. Lovisa is a general partner and a leader of one of Flagship's business units, and she joined me to explain how Flagship's unique approach to founding biotech businesses works and why it's established such a track record of success. Lovisa describes a process by which Flagship generates new ideas, funds those ideas, and moves their companies towards Series B fundraising and beyond. Will others imitate this entrepreneurial model? Find out why Lovisa thinks they should, but also why they probably won't. I hope you enjoy my chat with Lovisa Afzelius. Lovisa, thanks for joining us on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you so much for having me, Dylan.
I really want to get started by learning a little bit about your journey into biotech in the first place. You started off in Sweden, you did some academic work in chemistry. What really sparked your passion for biotech?
Well, that's a good question. So I've always been passionate about solving big problems, and I think that's where biotech really is so unique, that every day you go to work and you do something to address the biggest problems, unmet patient need, etc. And when I started off with I actually started off an industrial PhD with AstraZeneca back in Gothenburg at that time. And it was really to build something very new, which was an interface between biology, chemistry, and computational. And I would say that the idea of being sort of unbiased in your endeavors to identify novel solutions was very attractive to me. And I think that first project, and this is like late 1990s, really sort of captured my interest and was a reason for me pursuing a career within biotech or since then. And it was that vision of being able to simulate and build novel insights in silico that really drove that.
You mentioned AstraZeneca, but I think you also did a little bit of work at Pfizer as well. How did working for really big pharma firms give you some perspective on biotech? It's obviously very different from some of the startups that you're working with today.
So I would say that both AstraZeneca and Pfizer and these big pharma, they are extremely good learning schools, because in that sense that you have the chance to go through so many different projects simultaneously at different stages. So I worked all the way from the very, very early stages, hit identification, all the way through to clinical development, and have had the chance to bring now with several of those drugs now being on the market. That just gives you the ability to look at problems from many different directions and be exposed to a lot of different scenarios. And that goes also that these biotech or these pharma are many times across multiple different disease areas. So that's also given me the opportunity to first start off in cardiovascular metabolic diseases, but then move into neurodegenerative diseases and CNS, and then move on to inflammation immunology, and now focusing also on infectious diseases, as well as broadly across that spectra that I was just mentioning. But that exposure, I think, is a very, very good learning school from big pharma, for sure.
But then you jump out of big pharma and into some really entrepreneurial work. I think it was Elsa.Science how do you go from one of the biggest pharma companies in the world to something so entrepreneurial and much more agile?
Yeah. So it actually started off earlier. So it started off in beginning of 2010, or actually 2013, when I became CEO of a small startup in Sweden in neurodegenerative diseases. And I got a scholarship to do an MBA because as a first-time CEO, there was a lot I really did not know about how to run a company, and in particular not a small startup. And in the same time, I was also, soon after, I was recruited to Pfizer in the US and we moved here. And I asked if I could keep that scholarship and actually pursue my MBA here. And they said that was okay. So I enrolled to MIT, and that was a very, very good school for actually becoming much more aware of that there is a whole life science ecosystem outside of the big pharma. Because when you are in big pharma, it's very easy that all you see is that. And one of actually the teachers during that MBA was Nubera Feyen, who is the CEO and founder of Flagship Pioneering. He gave a lecture on entrepreneurship and pioneering. And I think that really opened my eyes to think about innovation very differently from what I've ever been thinking about it before. And the idea of actually being able to institutionalize the process of innovation and entrepreneuring. And that made me very excited about exploring further what that would be like. So I left Big Pharma and I joined one of the ecosystem startups and had the possibility over the coming years to really, build out from being four people, moving from the 85,000 people at Pfizer to four people in the startup, raising a Series B, doing two M&As, moving into clinic. And that's when I was asked also then after if I wanted to come on board to Flagship Pioneering and do that repeatedly over and over and over again.
Are they really different modes of thinking? I mean, on one side, you've got the really 85,000 person pharma firm and the 4-person startup, but you've also got the science-led thinking of a lab researcher who's just looking for the answer versus the entrepreneurial mindset of, well, we've got to actually make some money out of this at some point. How do those different thought processes fit together? Is it something easy to do?
So that's a very good question. And it's a very important question because you always have to have value creation in mind. And for me, patient unmet need, if you do something that unlocks an unmet need and serves patients, you are creating value. And oftentimes I feel like that is one of the best ways of really connecting what you're doing in the lab to the value creation, which is also easily explainable as you're sitting as groups in these companies to make that bridge.
We've heard a little bit about you now. Maybe we should jump in and learn a little bit about what Flagship Pioneering is all about. It's not your typical VC firm, is that right?
That is right. We're not at all. I would call us a venture creation firm. So we're similar to others in that we raise funds. So we have our Fund 7 and Fund 8, out of which we fund our companies. So while others are investing in or co-investing in already existing companies, what is critical to Flagship is that we build our companies ourselves internally. And we found them and we fund them ourselves up until about a Series B. So what Flagship has built is really the ability to have both this very, very strong science and ability to build platforms together with knowledge around entrepreneurship and pioneering, but also bringing the capital to the table so that you can actually do what you need to do and not what you can necessarily afford to do, which is otherwise what happens when you're in a much more spoon-fed financing environment. And in doing so, we can create and we can build these platform companies. And we truly believe in platform companies, which are platforms that you can literally point towards multiple different areas of value. because it allows you, because when we think about risk, I mean, there are many different risks when you do small startups. You can think about biology risk and technology risk and financing risk and execution risk. And if we can mitigate much more on the technology and financing risk and execution risk by having a process in place, how we do this repeatedly, we can focus on the biology risk with platforms where we can mitigate the biology risk by actually having a platform that can go towards many different biologies. Because if one biology doesn't read out, we can always sort of point the platform towards another area of biology. So that's just one aspect of Flagship. But I think that there is also another very important aspect of Flagship that I'd love to bring up, which is how we're always looking for value beyond adjacencies. So most others, they aim to operate close to where others have been before because it's perceived as lower risk. We actually think about it slightly differently because we make a strong distinction between risk and uncertainty. So when you go into a new field, which is far out from when anyone else has been before, we can take the example of Alterna, which is the world's first tRNA platform. Others thought about tRNA as a worker bee in the cell. We thought about it as, the most critical molecule because it's actually connects the mRNA to the protein. So if there is no tRNA, there will just never be a protein. So that means it should be important, right? But it's also, when you start off on a new venture like that, it's oftentimes perceived as high risk. But what it really is, it's that it's high uncertainty because you know so little about it. And in our process, we focus very much on decreasing that uncertainty. So very early on, we define for ourselves what are the key critical questions that we need to answer to ourselves to actually understand if this is a viable hypothesis and rapidly focus on those sort of killer questions, if we put it that way. And if we, at the end of that endeavor, can answer to ourselves that, yes, this is actually possible, and we can go out to key opinion leaders and ask them, does this seem to be making sense based on everything you know in this field? And they say, yeah, it's just that no one has thought about it before. That is sort of the best answer to us. And what happens then, if we think about it, is that we have ourselves decreased the uncertainty because we have learned so many new things. And now we can actually define a risk. And we can make a decision whether this is something that we actually do want to pursue or not. And I think that is a very unique way of thinking about differentiate between uncertainty and risk that I think is very much core to the process that we have at Flagship that allows us to constantly create new companies over and over again by being super creative, having wonderful people, super smart people working together on the problems, but also maintaining and sticking to a process throughout that very creative process.
Where are you finding the founding teams here? When you say you're building these companies, you're building them yourself, are you recruiting them in? Are you recruiting them from different areas? Are you taking people who've already got an established platform and just bringing them under your wing? Can you tell me where do they come in?
Yeah. So that's a great question because it's actually probably different from what most people would think, because we are not necessarily looking for a specific phenotype with a specific background, etc. Most of our originators, they have very strong scientific background, but they can come from very different areas of expertise. Many live in that interface between biology and AI, sometimes with a PhD in both areas. But I think what's most important is that they have a humongous interest for going beyond and exploring new areas. So we bring in people that together work on developing these new hypotheses, and we do that by brainstorming on what are areas that we would like to focus on in a very unconstrained process. We can innovate in any area, which I think is part of our success as well. Because if you only do what you had done before, or you only do towards a specific goal, you become very limited in what it is that where you're getting companies built in. And instead, we really emphasize and encourage everyone to go across boundaries as to what they've done before, and more thinking about the problem and that they're looking to solve, and see from what different areas and disciplines do you want to bring insights from. And oftentimes that is really where we find these unique opportunities, where by applying, let's say, a new AI technology to something that was previously an unsolved problem, all by a sudden the biology and the AI works together, and you can uncover something new. I mean, one good example of that is Prolog, which is our company that is thinking about the viral proteome. So this was actually during the course of the pandemic. We looked at viruses and we're like, viruses are bad. But what if we think about them in a different way? What if we can think about what they actually could do to our benefit? And at the same time, AlphaFold came out, and all by a sudden, every sequence, all by a sudden, was a structure. And we said, there must be something in between here. And we sort of said, we also, thought about that, viruses, they have hijacked human proteins over a long period of time and then continue to evolve them. So that evolutionary pressure allows the system to be exposed to viral variants, millions and millions of viral variants over time, and select for, by the evolutionary pressure, those that have the biggest impact of the human biology. And we asked ourselves, what if we could use these ones as therapeutics? Because they have been evolutionary optimized over millions and millions of years. But then why has no one thought about that before? Why hasn't anyone done it before? Well, it's because there are like 7 million different viral protein sequences out there in the literature and in databases, but there is no functional annotation of them. So it's like a big lake of just strings of sequences that no one knows what they mean. So then we said, okay, now with AlphaFold, all by a sudden every sequence is a structure. That's not going to be enough to sort of identify which one are useful for as therapeutics, but at least it is a starting point. So what if we build a platform, build an engine that allows us to actually annotate substructures based on sequences that may have certain biological properties? And that was sort of the starting point of Prolog. And then now we have an engine that allows us to really extract in proteins out of that massive sort of sequence space that have turned out to be very, very powerful therapeutics in the human setting when we test them preclinically.
You mentioned your Fund 7 and Fund 8. I mean, these are $1 billion funds. And then you talk about Prolog and how Prolog just came about basically as this idea of, well, what if we did this? Where are you deploying all this money in the startup creation phase? I mean, is it so much in ideation? Is there so much for bringing on a team? Where are you actually deploying the money? And is it more at the start, or are you keeping some behind later for growth?
Yeah. I mean, we are very much long-term investors. We are not investors. These are really, we are the founders. We are very close to these companies throughout the lifetime of the companies. So we start off by being the sole investors in the companies. We start off with running explorations within sort of Flagship, where we get to the point of, as I mentioned before, this killer question as to what is it that we really need to show to ourselves for this to be an idea. And then we put a couple of $1 million towards the certain hypothesis that we have in mind to test it experimentally, computationally, to generate the data that gives us reason to believe that this is actually a viable path forward. And then when we have done that, we've convinced ourselves, and others around us say that, that seems really exciting. It's just that no one's done it before. We create new codes, and there we put in maybe 20, 30, $50 million, and what others oftentimes call, the Series A. And we build out the platforms and we build out sort of the teams and really start thinking deeply about value creation and what does the pipeline need to look like in order for this to be a viable company. And throughout this process, Flagship are the sole investors. So we take all this early risk, but also the possibility of really thinking deeply about the science ourselves and go where we believe that we have the biggest opportunity. And then at about Series B, that's the first time, first of all, we bring in an external CEO. So I stay on as a CEO until about that time. Together we build the story, but we also bring in an external CEO that have the experience of and really have scaled companies in the past or have built companies to be the biggest versions of themselves. And together we go out and raise a Series B. And this is the first time we bring in external capital. Then we continue to invest in all the coming cycles as well, and oftentimes all the way to the IPO and beyond.
You're in the US,
Yep.
but you're expanding now into the UK and Europe. Is this a big step for Flagship, or is it an inevitable step?
So it's a good question, and to me personally, I think it's an inevitable step. We are global citizens, and science is global. And I think that we really want to be a global organization. And it is at the same time a big step because it's not easy to just sort of recreate yourself in different areas. But with the right passion for actually doing so and seeing the true benefits of the global footprint, I think we're in a very, very good position to actually do so.
You mentioned a couple of companies along the way there, and I mean, these are companies that people are really starting to hear about. The Alterna, but also, I mean, Moderna is a flagship company as well.
Yeah.
You know, what makes you so much better at identifying these really disruptive companies versus a traditional VC model?
I think it's the repeatedness and the programmability in what we're doing, that we always stick to the same process, and we have very skilled teams that are trained in how to think differently, really trained in how to be unbiased and really go after, as I mentioned before, those non-adjacencies. We are not looking to do same as others. We are looking to unlock very different areas, because that gives us also freedom to then continue to evolve, because this is very much white space that no one else is. And I mean, experience is always important. Flagship's been around since 2000. All in all, 100 different companies have been founded. And right now we have about 40 companies that we're working closely with. And it is a lot about being in an environment where the impossible seems possible, because everyone around you are also doing it. And I think just from a mental model perspective, it's just so much easier to be in an environment where everyone are starting companies. Your threshold for actually doing it yourself goes down, because you always have someone to ask, how did you even think about when you got into that challenge or whatever? Because we are all going through the same phases, basically, with all of our different companies, but just at different time scales. So that is an institutional learning, which I think is core to our ability to actually do this over and over and over again. And I would say get better at it in every iteration, because we iterate all the time and we try to learn, apply, learn, apply, learn, apply. And that, I think, is the reason for why we can do this successfully.
Having that model, or that program of, we know what works, we can keep iterating and improving it, but we have a model of how to start a company, get it up, get it running, and get it to a point where we can raise some more money and bring in some outside investors eventually. That's great to have that model. You know, imagine I'm convinced, why isn't everybody else doing it this way? Is there something holding them back?
I mean, it's a lot of hard work. There's no question about it. And you have to have a lot of good ideas. And you need to create that ecosystem. And it's not built overnight. And you take all the early risk yourself, but at the same time, if you're convinced and you're committed to it, it is to be in a good position. But there are easier ways of doing things. You can find easier jobs and just go to work at 8 to 5. I think we live our companies and we love what we do, and I think that passion is what brings people together to actually want to do it in these types of setting. Um, but it's a lot of experience within these walls, and I think just gathering that experience in one and the same place, uh, that is that's not so easy, and that takes time to build.
Generating these ideas, generating these killer questions that allow you to just think differently about an area and ask the what ifs that other people aren't. How do you go about building a culture where people can come up with ideas like that and ask those sorts of questions?
That's very interesting to reflect over. And coming back a little bit to your points as to big pharma and the differences being in different environments. And I would say when I reflect back over some of the biggest differences with regards to big pharma maybe and where I am now is that, if you say no to it, given the sort of risk in biotech and sort of the failure rate, I mean, that we see from the very early inception to something coming on the market, you will always have the highest probability of being right if you say no. That's a given. And oftentimes it is a safe position to say no, that's not possible, that's not going to work. You're going to be right many times. I think what we really create here is a culture where you say yes and. So what's very, very important is that when there are new ideas coming up, no matter how crazy they may sound at first, what you still want to do is that you want to say, you need to really have the mental model of that you're saying yes and. Because that is how you start to unlock and bring that from a super crazy idea to something that you're actually, okay, if you think about 100 different ways how we could make the impossible possible, you will find something that may not be completely crazy. And then you spin off from there. So I think it's building that culture that you never sort of that you don't just kill ideas. Instead, you sort of, okay, there is this person bringing this forward. There is something behind it. How can I build on that? And I think that is super important for being a creative culture and innovative culture as we are here.
Some of the companies that have spun out of Flagship have gone on to do amazing things, and almost everybody would have heard about Moderna because of what happened through COVID and the fantastic innovations there, and they're still there today. But then there are some other companies that, like a lot of biotech companies, just struggled to find a market fit. How do you balance the risk of most companies not making it with the possibility that they could be a shooting star?
I mean, it's a good question, and I would say that it is about always building out scenarios for yourself, because we know that you will oftentimes and imagine different realities for the future. And I think that is very integral to our process, and I think very, very important. And when I say, because we will, all of us will, and that's the entire biotech, and that's the entire sort of science field, is that you will find challenges many, many times. It's part of the excitement. They're also part of the hard work that the science it's not figured out. So you have to figure it out as you go along. But what we focus a lot of time on is to building out different scenarios. And when I say building out different scenarios, I don't just mean that we put like 4 different, plays on a piece of paper, like we could be here or there or there. I really mean building out the entire scenario. We can make the analogy with building houses. So there's one thing to say you're going to build it in 3 different geographies. It's a completely different thing to say, if I build it here, and I put this type of house and I put the sofa in that, what view will I have from there? And if I do that level of granularity in my scenario planning for all the different houses that you're planning for, you can be much more informed as to seeing what is the value creation or what is the view that I would see from each of these different windows. And then if you hit a hurdle, you have already thought through all the way what other optionalities could be for you. And then it's much easier to rapidly pivot into another way of thinking about it because you've already done the mental work of putting yourself in what that alternative future could potentially be looking for. And for me, that is a framework that is really helpful because oftentimes it's the mental models that block you from finding that next. And if you already spend time thinking about it, you're just much more agile in jumping to a next and a different future.
There are at least a couple of flagship companies that come to mind when we think about AI and biology really making that mix. A priori, Metaphor Biotechnologies as well. You know, they both have approaches where AI is just fundamental to the value that's being created there. From your perspective, or from Flagship's perspective, how important is AI to biology now, and is it likely just to become more and more important?
So I would say AI is core to everything we do today, and it will just, I think, become even more important for the future. And I think it just opens up avenues that we just never seen before. At the same time, one has to be, take it stepwise as to never losing track of what it is that you're actually applying AI towards and why, and learn because there is so much we still don't know about how we shall be applying AI. And I think good examples, you brought up a priori and metaphor, and I think those are great examples of where AI can really, really puts us in a completely different future from where we were before. And let me take the example of, for example, metaphor, because metaphor is generative biology in the sense that we design novel therapeutics with functional attributes. And there was a paper in Science not too long ago around AlphaFold and how it was basically saying AlphaFold is running out of data. And what the authors made the claim that it was just a lack of data and that there was a collaborations now being put in place between different parties to actually feed the algorithms with more data. And that would sort of help solve the challenges with AlphaFold. And I think, there is more data is oftentimes a very important piece, and it's makes models better, etc. But it's not just about more data. It's also about the right types of data. And I think in particular when it comes to generative modeling, that is essential, because if you think about crystal structure data, which almost every single company that are doing AI design of therapeutics start off from. A crystal structure is something super static. It is also maybe taken out of the membrane, a lot of truncations in order to be able to crystallize it. And then you look at it in a cryo state. So it's very static. And we all know that biology is not static. Biology is a lot of dynamics. It's different binding partners coming in and bringing different aspects or binding partners together. You get conformational changes, and then you get differences in the downstream signaling. And only if you capture that types of data and that type of data, can you actually train your models to design for it, right? So that's what we've been focusing on at Metaphor, to really generate living cell data on how binding results in function. So how does a molecule engage with the target, and how does it then affect downstream signaling? And we can, in this system with deep mutation scanning, we actually experimentally generate 100 billions of data points. And we use that to train our models. And that has allowed us to very rapidly, in less than a year, we actually generated 5 agonistic antibodies, many of them towards GPCRs. And there are no agonistic antibodies on the market. So I think this is one example where by having the right types of data, and then we can use all the other tools that everyone else is using as well, we can unlock novel biology that has just not been programmable before. And I think agonistic antibodies is one of these areas. It has not been programmable before. It has been serendipity that has driven that, because the information that goes into or other AI models does not capture it. And then you don't have that information. So I think it's a lot about also thinking about the amounts of data and the types of data in order to explain. And the models will never be better than the data they are built from, right?
You know, it's sometimes pretty easy to learn lessons from businesses that succeed and entrepreneurs that succeed. It's being able to learn the lessons from the ones that don't succeed and unpacking why that happened. That can lead to real growth and iteration on a business model. Can you think of a time, maybe a business that Flagship invested in and it just didn't work, but you learned something from that process that you're able to apply the next time, the next round, the next company?
So I would say that we learn those lessons every day, right? In every company, there are things that we test that work out, and there are things that we test that do not work out. And we try to have a very sort of iterative process for our learning and for our evolution, so that we learn from every day's mistake and apply it into our next iteration of learning. And I can only agree with you. That is immensely important. It's always hard to make explicit examples because there could be so many. It takes a lot of time to really dig into every example that you have. I have a bank of different examples, absolutely, that I constantly draw from. But I think it's more about putting that process and having that hat on all the time, where you learn from how does this pan out across when you have seen something before, what are the different settings that you've seen it in? How did it pan out? And why did it pan out in a different way in one over the other? And just constantly bring that up in your decision making for that next round as well. But use it as satellite points, not because every situation is always so different. So you also need to make sure that you constantly sort of bring the right reference frame to the problem that you're at. But I couldn't agree more. It's a super important aspect of how we can evolve successfully as companies.
So looking forward, what's the future now for Flagship? Are there companies that we're going to be hearing about in the next few months? What does it look like in the next 12 to 18 months for Flagship?
Oh, I think it's a very exciting time ahead. You mentioned one of the areas that we're super passionate about, AI, biology. How do we really make AI come to life? I think Metaphor and A Priori are two companies you brought forward with regards to how we can use this very, very experimentally detailed information to be able to solve big problems. How can we build variant resilient vaccines? I think that's a very sort of valid question today. So how do we make sure that vaccines that are actually the therapeutic or prophylactic that have saved the most lives in humanity, how do we ensure that we bring new such technology to the market because we need it as humanity? I'm super excited about Metaphor, obviously, as we are unlocking a complete new class of antibodies, agonistic antibodies. And, 80% of biology is through signaling. It's not through blocking, which every antagonistic antibody does. So we're like tapping into that 80% of totality of biology that has not really been accessible before. That's super exciting. I couldn't be more proud of the Alterna team that is now bringing tRNA for the first time into clinic. The ability to go after rare genetic diseases as baskets. So how can we use a single molecule to treat hundreds or thousands of different rare genetic diseases? Those are the kind of things that we can go from where rare diseases can be treated like common diseases. And imagine the kind of unmet need that you can meet with such a medicine, because that is not a world where we will have regulatory approvals for thousands of different rare diseases. It will be another 100 years before that actually happens. So I think that's some of for me the exciting areas ahead, that where I think we have really, we see the unmet need, we see the patient groups that will benefit tremendously from this, and I think that is the strongest motivator one can have.
In preparing to talk to you today, I looked at some of the other talks that you've given and some of the things you've written. One thing that jumped out was you spoke about the importance of diversity of mindset and multidisciplinary teams in attacking some of these problems. Is that something we should look for Flagship to continue to foster as you move forward?
Yeah, totally. And I think diversity is such an important piece of what we're doing, because being creative and having input that is different from every single person around the table is critical for doing what we're doing. And by bringing people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, those that, in every aspect of diversity, I think that where we have such an edge, because we are a very sort of diverse organization as such. And for me, it's immensely important. Equally important that you need to have people that speak both languages when it comes to biology and machine learning. Equally important it is that we have strong female leaders, strong cultural differences on the team. I mean, whatever it is when it comes to diversity, we should always strive for having as many differences or diversities around the table, because the product, I think, really becomes a much better product in the end. And it's more fun to have many different flavors of life around you.
Finally, Lovisa, I guess what would be the legacy that you're hoping to leave with your work in Flagship? Is it just founding these companies? Is it exploring new ideas? Is it something else?
I mean, for me, it is imagine, unlocking a just unmet patient need and seeing how, let's take these rare genetic disease patients. There is such a great unmet need in that area, for example. Imagine bringing a therapy that can be used across thousands of different diseases that otherwise would get no attention. I mean, that I think would be such a legacy to be able to do. And I think more generally, what motivates me is that you have a lot of ability to steer where you're going and really focus on what really matters. And that's a very unique position to be in, and something one should worship and take care of, because it's a great opportunity to leave a footprint after.
Lovisa, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Pleasure speaking to you.
Today's podcast was brought to you with the support of Jubilant Biosys.
With more than 20 years' experience in small molecule drug discovery, Jubilant Biosys offers comprehensive services in integrated drug discovery, contract research, development and manufacturing. We have recently reached a strategic agreement with Pierre Fabre Laboratories to acquire their biologics R&D centre at Saint-Julien-en-Genevois in France. This centre of excellence provides a strategic footprint for Jubilant in Europe and the platform for a unique delivery model that integrates domain expertise in monoclonal antibodies, ADCs and related conjugated modalities with the chemistry capability of 1,200 scientists in India. If you'd like to know more, please visit us at www.jubilantbiosys.com.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.